Okay, we're recording. Hey everybody, this is Rem Hellman with Keeping Democracy Alive. My standard introduction, I'm a rising junior at Tufts University, majoring in international relations, focusing on globalization. This series, this speaker series of mine, which is, it's a social justice speaker series, is hosted by the Cummings program for Holocaust and Genocide Education, which is through Tufts Hillel. And Tufts Hillel has been the backbone of this project since its inception. So my standard shout outs and my standard introduction go to Lauren Bloom, my supervisor for the program that I'm working in, the Cummings program, and then also Pete Loeb and Hannah Rich, who help they're doing all the behind the scenes back work to help get every video out and posted. So thank you guys. So today, I'm very, very excited because I get to interview a good friend of mine, a mentor of mine, Billy Planner. Billy is the executive director of an amazing program, Etgar 36, which will be the center of our discussion today. And I was very lucky to meet Billy freshman year, going into sophomore year of high school, when I actually was a participant in his program with a friend of mine. And it was I don't think it's an over exaggeration to say it was a life-changing experience and a life-shaping experience, I should say, because I was so young. So yes, this is Billy Planner, and he's going to introduce himself and talk to us a little bit about Etgar, and then we'll get into our conversation.
Great. Well, it's great to be here with you, Rem, and to see you and doing this kind of work, and the connection to your experience on the summer trip. Like yourself, I am a native Atlantan, grew up in Atlanta, which I think somehow definitely impacts our connection to civil rights and social justice. It's just part of the city and our history with Dr. King, clearly, and others. I grew up in Atlanta, and I created Etgar 36, a 36-day summer trip going across America, where you're engaging with all sides of political issues, pro-life, pro-choice, pro-guns, pro-gun control, all to develop your voice, your opinion, and learn the lost art. Clearly, we have lost the art of civil discourse in America today, so that, as you remember, you can sit there and talk to people you disagree with, all to discover what it is you think, as well as see America. So this past summer would have been our 18th summer. Unfortunately, we had to keep the bus on the side of the road, but that's what it's all about. And then during the academic year, we are leading civil rights trips, Atlanta, Montgomery, Birmingham, and Selma, which, every year seems to be more and more relevant in this country. I keep thinking we may have hit the high point, but America keeps showing me that the lessons and the strategies of the civil rights movement can be applied to today's world so easily, and so important to learn these issues. And the summer trip is for teenagers, but our civil rights trips, over half of our trips, we run about 50 of them a year. Over half the population now is adults coming on the trip to learn these same lessons. Yeah. So that's what it's all about.
It is what it's all about. By the way, that's something my grandfather says all the time. He goes, he's a man of few words. He's Lithuanian, so he doesn't talk too much, but when he does, he loves to say it. And that's what life's all about. That's his go-to line. All right, let's backtrack and start kind of from the beginning. So what led to you wanting to create Etgar? What was
right? Yeah. So really, Rem, I've learned a lot about my life in hindsight. It's only later did I realize, oh, there's the connection there. Yeah. So I just got asked recently, since we've been on the side of the road since COVID and not doing the trips, and it coincided with the murder of George Floyd and the racial unrest the new round of racial unrest in America, I got asked by a group to talk about how to have an uncomfortable conversation. And somebody said to me, you know, you made a career out of seeking out uncomfortable conversations, something people don't do usually. And I started to think, you know what, you're right. It never really occurred to me that that was what was happening. And then I started to think, how did I get to that? And you're what, a rising junior in
Mhm.
college? You're
Yeah.
right, junior year.
Yeah.
When I was a senior in college, so 1988, I can tell you specifically, December 21st, 1988, is when I think this all started to gel with me, and I didn't even realize it until much later. And that was the night that we heard about Pan Am Flight 103, the flight that was crashed in Europe due to Libyan terrorists putting a bomb on it. And I was a senior at Syracuse University, and it turns out that 38 Syracuse students were coming home from their semester abroad that on that flight, including my junior year roommate, including friends that I followed the Grateful Dead with. Um, and I realized that I was connected to people and events that I didn't even know about. Um, and because really the tensions between America and Libya started when I was 14 years old and really not concerned about the world around me, the bigger world around me. And I
Yeah.
started to really think, you know, what would happen if the person who put the bomb on the plane, what if instead of acting out of fear and ignorance and hate, got to know the people on the plane, could they do such harm? And therefore, my life wouldn't have been so impacted. It's you know, you and I have had this conversation before.
Hmm.
Sometimes the most selfless acts come out of selfish needs. I didn't want my life impacted like that again. So maybe we should get out and start to meet and talk to people who don't look like us, who don't think like us, who don't pray like us, who don't love like us, and leading into November, don't vote like us. It's really important to get out of your comfort zone. And so I really began to understand that nothing's going to come out of comfort. It's got to come out of uncomfortable situations and uncomfortable conversations. And so I started to really, I started to realize that that idea was really coming through in the work I was doing. At the time, I was leading youth groups, and your older brother was part of that youth group, and slowly started to put together programming that dealt with this issue of engaging and broadening your understanding and your experiences. And I started to take the youth group to a different city every year where they were engaging in the history and the culture. And really impacted me was our second trip was to Memphis, Tennessee, where
At,
we could,
at this point, was it called Etgar already?
no, it was just the youth group. The
Okay.
weekend trip
Okay.
that I was doing with the kids was called Etgar, because Etgar is the Hebrew word for challenge.
Yeah.
I was trying to challenge their American and Jewish identities as a synagogue youth group,
Hmm.
um, but also the challenge of getting involved in the world around you.
Yeah.
So in Memphis, it was we were studying the history of rock and roll with the history of the civil rights movement and how it all came together. Music really was one of the things that helped break down the barriers and pop culture between white teenagers and black teenagers. Um, and that was really one of the things that really got me to start thinking about a bigger project, which became the summer trip.
So the next step was kind of just like, let's do it. And you,
Yeah, it was. I wish I had a sexier story for you, or a more developed story, but it was literally, I was done doing the usual youth group things like running bowling nights
yeah.
or sporting events. I had to have a little more substance, and I was realizing that's what came from the December 21st, 1988, the Pan Am Flight 103 was I knew I wanted to do things that had more of an impact than just fun. It was so when I was still running the youth groups, we would there was sort of an unstated understanding between the youth group members and myself where if we're on a camping trip and they wanted the whitewater rafting, they had to give me what I wanted, which was a 20-30 minute discussion about current events and their connection to it. And so it was really, it came to a point where I was like, I can't do the normal youth group thing anymore.
Yeah.
I just can't do the sporting events or the bowling nights. And I was sitting on a couch going, what I really like about the programming that I do with the youth group is this trip. And so I put together a bunch of the weekend trips that we had been doing, looked at a map and figured out what made sense logically and logistically to make your way across America, and then started putting in the issues together. So for example,
Yeah.
if you remember, we meet with, we talk about illiteracy in America.
Yeah.
It's a gentleman who learned how to read when he was 44 years old.
Francisco. San
Exactly.
Francisco, right?
Right. So the reason it's in San Francisco is City Lights Bookstore is there, a powerful, important bookstore in the history and culture of America. So it made sense to talk about illiteracy while also going into City Lights Bookstore.
Yeah. So, um, kind of, I'm sure a listener would already kind of understand what's going on here, but give like a little bit, you don't have to go into detail of like every city and what's going on, but like a little bit more of a bigger picture idea of what Edgar 36's summer looks like,
So let's,
and what the 36 stands for.
sure.
Yeah.
So the 36, there's a bunch of variations as to why 36. And one of the things I learned was other people's interpretations are sometimes better than the reality. The reality Rem was a lot less impressive than what other people glommed onto it. The reality was I wanted the interstate logo as the interstate sign as the Etgar logo. And a friend said a number would be really cool in the name. So the summer trip was 36 days. So if you look at the interstate sign, you have a big number at the bottom, and across the red part said Etgar, then 36. On my first information night, at a synagogue, somebody said, I love the 36, the double chai, the double life of being an American and a Jew. And I was like, exactly. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Then somebody else goes, the Hasidic teaching of the Lamed Vavniks, that there are 36 righteous people in the world, and we have to find out who they are. I was like, exactly. That's it. So somebody was like, you're creating some of the Lamed Vavniks. I was like, sure, that could be it as well. So I do think and do like the 36, the double life of being an American and a Jew, of leading a life of importance and connection. So the trip, an example would be of what happens almost every day. So for high school students, especially, school violence, school shootings, it's still a major issue when school's in session. You know, it's sad that during the pandemic, of course, we've seen the only drop in school shootings for years. But so, for example, the idea of guns in America, you meet with a father whose son was shot and killed at Columbine High School, you know, the first major recent gun shooting in America that really opened the eyes of America. So he's gone on to become a nationwide gun control speaker and expert. But then you also meet with a lobbyist of the National Rifle Association to hear what they have to say. So it's really engaging in both sides and understanding the issue, and really understanding that most of America does not fall, is not binary. It doesn't fall out yes or no, but really there's a lot of overlap and shades of gray. So once again, it's meeting with all of those sides. You meet with Pro-Life Texas, and then meet with NARAL Pro-Choice and Planned Parenthood to get that side of the debate. Once again, for you to engage with various sides and learn various sides, so that even if you double down on your already understood opinion on something, it's based off of hearing the other side.
Yeah.
So you truly understand why you think the way it is you do.
Yeah. That was definitely the most, I mean, that is pretty much the main intention of the program beyond the traveling and experience to America and culture. And I think that was, I don't know, that was definitely so powerful for me, especially since I did it with Eli Myers, a friend of mine who, although he's a friend, we differ politically. And
Yeah.
so it was interesting to be able to go into conversations and then kind of like hear his side from a lobbyist and hear my side from a lobbyist and then discuss afterwards. Um,
Yeah,
but
one of the powerful things, Rem, that I hope happens too,
yeah,
as opposed to what happens in America right now, which is for me to be right, you have to be wrong and actually pretty much start to dislike, if not hate each other.
yeah,
You could disagree with Eli or whoever was on the trip, but then that night you're at an amusement park together.
right,
So,
exactly.
you know,
And I think that's like the best part. And I think that's why I really liked how Memphis was so early on, because everyone relates to music,
hmm
right? And so like you kind of start off learning about something, learning about the civil rights movement, which isn't it shouldn't at least be very controversial. I don't think it is a very controversial thing at the
historically it's
moment.
not. No.
But then you have like this music thing and you like realize, okay, like this is what the trip's going to be like. We're going to be having these things, but then we're also going to be friends and interacting at night and having fun together at night. And yeah, I like, that's exactly the reason I brought you on to talk, is because
Mhm.
you're kind of, while other people are approaching um, the social justice work through a lens of, here's a problem, let me solve it, which is great. You're
Yeah.
kind of like, here, like, this is America. How do we have a conversation about this? It's not like I'm going to give you a solution. It's like, I want you to think for yourself
Yeah.
and
Right.
be able to interact with others and work um, cooperatively with others, which is an amazing thing.
That's right. The risk or the roll of the dice. I don't think it's risky though, but the unstated roll of the dice is that success has to be that a participant develops their thinking that is going to be exactly opposite of what I would advocate for or fight for on a daily basis. Uh, because really, the point of the trip is to develop what you think. And
Yeah,
if you're going to allow free thinking, it has to be that that person comes to the ideas that are the polar opposite of what I think. And the
right,
important part of the trip is not what I think, it's what you think.
right,
So, I try very hard on the trip that it's not my, I'll be asked quite a lot, what do you think about it? And my answer is it's not important what I think,
right,
because I want each
right.
participant
I
to come up.
remember that. I remember that vividly. I remember
Mhm,
like trying to ask you questions, and you're like, "It's not important what I think. Like, think about it for yourself, internalize it, and come
mhm,
up with what you think." And I think like something that isn't kind of what's the word, advertised to potential participants when you're trying to find kids, or when kids are like figuring out if they want to do Edgar for the summer or not, is what
mhm.
happens after the fact. And I think one of the best parts about doing Edgar has been the um, the back end ability to go on Facebook now
Yeah.
and then see all these other, through you primarily, but to be able to like interact and see all these other Edgar alumni who are posting on Facebook their political opinions, and other Edgar alumni responding to them about like something. And it's like this whole discourse, but it's all so calm and there's no hard feelings. And like, it's amazing to me that not only did your program inspire people to think and interact with each other cooperatively at the moment, but also they took this beyond the program and they continued this interaction and they continued talking about things. People comment on your post. You'll post something that you think, because you've separated yourself, right? You're like, it's not about what I think. So now that
Right.
there's a lot, you're allowed to post what you think, and so you'll post what you think. And then there's plenty of people who are like, no, Billy, I agree with you here, but I don't agree with you here. And then there's other, like, yeah, Billy, I totally empathize with that. Like, that's exactly what I'm feeling right now. And so that's something I love, and it's not really highlighted too much when we talk about Edgar 36.
It is, it one of the great thrills for me is to watch it grow
Yeah.
with the participants. I call it, I don't think there's a technical term for it or a theoretical term for it. I call it percolating education, in that a lot of what we throw at you, I mean, you were what, 15 when you went on the trip?
Just about, yeah.
Yeah. You were 14 when you went on the trip?
Just
Um,
about,
you're in there, 14, 15. Um, there's going to be a lot that's not going to completely resonate perfectly with you. You may have an understanding of what we're talking about, or have an opinion that is fine for a 14 and 15-year-old to develop. But for a lot of teenagers, this is the first time they're thinking about this or understanding that there's another way to think about it, because we do tend to live in our own bubble
yeah.
in America. And what I love is what we call on the trip, and you'll remember this term, we call it tripping over the trip. When, you know, you will all of a sudden come face to face with the issue again, or somebody's opinion, or you're able to use something that all of a sudden you're like, oh, that's what we were talking about in Oklahoma City. That's what this person was meaning um, during that meeting. And you see it from a whole nother perspective. Now you're a junior in college. Your ideas and thoughts, they should be different than they were at 14 or 15, I hope. But, you know, even to the small things of, I got a note, somebody was taking the SAT, and there was a whole section on the beatniks. And all of a sudden they're like, I now know. He goes, I really didn't appreciate the conversation that much when we were having it. It was just, who really cares about Jack Kerouac? But all of a sudden I understood who the beatniks were,
Yeah.
and could relate. So even Rem, even our oldest alumni are in their mid 30s now. Even they will write back and say, you know, today this happened, or this happened in the news, and it made me think back to this. So it's powerful.
Exactly. And I do want to move on uh, after this thought, though, because there's a few other things that you do beyond the summer
Yeah.
program that I think are worth highlighting. Um, I think another thing for me um, is, you know, there's people of all sorts, right? There's people will who are very patriotic and are like, I want America to be the best it can be. And then there's other people who are less patriotic, and they're like, you know, if America goes to crap, I'm out of here. Like, it's
Mm-hmm.
like, I don't really care so much about it being in America. I just care about my community being where it needs to be. And what I really appreciated about your program is that, you know, it allowed me to realize the benefit, and not saying there's anything wrong with being the second person I mentioned, but it allowed me to realize that there is the capacity to be patriotic, love your country, find the beauty in the country, right? Like, we go to the Grand Canyon,
Mm-hmm.
we see Vegas, which is cool. We see the history of Memphis, and the cool, and like the downtown Memphis. We, you know, we go all around. We get to see Chicago, right? We everywhere, right? And I'm like, wow, this country is actually an amazing and beautiful place. What can I do, or what needs to be done in order to make it even better, right? So it made me more patriotic, rather than pushing. Like, I think there's it's very easy to feel like our country is going in the wrong direction, and I'm kind of just over it. Like, I don't want to deal with it anymore. And this kind of,
Yeah. I
yeah.
would push back a little bit, Rem, and
Yeah.
say you may be going there with this. This may be some of what you meant too, but I do want to make the point of, for example, the first few days when we're on the civil rights piece, and you're meeting with reverends who are on the front lines of pushing for change in America. And like you rightly said, in 2020, it's easy to look back at the early 60s and go, yes, I support all that. Well, that wasn't happening in the early 60s. It looked a lot like now, where there are questions on both sides of somebody taking a knee in protest of what's happening on the streets, you know,
Yeah.
um, and people evaluating other people's American identity based on whether they're in the streets or not in the streets. And I would argue that a true patriot loves their country enough to hold a mirror to it and say we should be and could be doing better than we are. It's not 100% love of the country. It's I want the best
Exactly.
for America.
Exactly. It's a critical lens of love, right?
Yeah,
It's
that's a great term.
it's I can I I see so much greatness in this country, but there's
Yeah,
things that need to be worked on. And
sure.
for it to be the best way possible, we need to be able to, exactly like Edgar 36 is trying to do, have civil discourse around the problems and sort some things out. But no, I think the way you said it was perfect. And thank you for clarifying that, because I feel like what I was saying could have easily been misconstrued, I could have just been saying it wrong. But yes, let's move on to, you know, briefly, let's briefly touch on the shorter trips you do to like
Mhm.
Birmingham and Selma. So let's talk about those, and then I want to talk more about. And we only have about like 10 more minutes, let's say. Let's try and budget into that.
Yeah.
I want to talk also about the mine trips because those are new, and I'm still kind of new to them too. So quickly, just do a quick dive into the short trips, and then let's talk about the mine trips.
So the civil rights trips are a 3-day trip through the American South: Atlanta, Montgomery, Birmingham, Selma. You know, the cradle of the civil rights movement. All to really take a look at what's happening today. In that, you know, when Rosa Parks sat down the bus in December 1st, 1955, that really created one of the most modern revolutions we're still dealing with. Almost all social movements get a lot of lessons and cues from the civil rights movement and the strategies. And so while we're dealing with history, we're also dealing with modern issues in that, you know, one of the places we go to is Bryan Stevenson's Equal Justice Initiative museum and memorial to the victims of, as he calls it, domestic terrorism, lynching. Uh, so we bring it to modern times. We've been going, when it was in Atlanta, to the AIDS quilt to understand that human rights, civil rights, is much more than just a history time and just about a certain, and not just about a certain people, but almost every marginalized group has had their time on the front lines of fighting for civil rights. And so we really delve into what were the strategies that the movement used, what was the history, how did peaceful protest make a change here versus violent protest. And so that's really what it's all about. And meeting with firsthand accounts right now. We meet with a woman who was 11 years old when she was beaten on the bridge in Selma, participating in the march from Selma to Montgomery, what was known as Bloody Sunday. In 1965, she was sitting there marching for voting rights, fighting for voting rights. And yet today, we're still fighting for those same rights, same issues. As she says, I want to steal her line, that vote must be really powerful if people are still trying to prevent you from having it. So once again, it's for young people, it's finding the inspiration to and empowerment to get involved. For older people, it's a recharge, but also for a lot of people, it's going back to a time in their history. For especially people on the older end, a lot of this is, I'll hear from people that are on the trip because when they were in college, they wanted to come down to Selma and participate in the marches, and their parents wouldn't let them leave college or they couldn't get down there. And so this is filling a gap in their life. Of actually marching over the Edmund Pettus Bridge. But once again, for younger people, it's a way of finding out and hearing the stories of normal, average, day-to-day citizens standing up and saying enough. And once again, challenging the status quo and saying this isn't good enough. And that, you know, if we're truly going to be one nation and equality, it's got to be for everybody.
Yeah. Let's talk about mind trips. I just want to say that a word that's been kind of powerful to me recently is the word normal. You know, like I think it's really easy to look at figures historically who have done something great, whether it's something related to social justice or even just like singing or being an
Right.
athlete. And a lot of them, when they talk about themselves, they're like, you know, I'm really just a normal person.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
nothing that special about me. I just had an idea, something inspired me, and I just did it. And I
Yeah.
think that's such a like I said, a powerful way to view other people, because then it kind of empowers yourself. You're like,
Sure.
I'm also a normal person.
Yeah.
If there's nothing special about me, I could do that too. So I
Right.
like how that's I feel like that's your intention, you know?
Right. So, like Dr. King, I think as a native Atlantan, I'm so proud that our city produced, I think, the greatest American this country has produced, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Um, the story we tell all the time, he moves down to Montgomery because he wanted a quiet place to finish his dissertation. He finishes it, and a few weeks later, Rosa Parks gets arrested on the bus. He's chosen to be the head of the movement. We think, well, of course you'd choose Dr. King. Look at who he is. But he was 25 years old at the time. He
Yeah.
was not the Dr. King he grew into being. The reason locals will tell you the reason he was chosen to be the leader of the movement, the Montgomery Improvement Association at the time, was because he wasn't local. They didn't know how the bus boycott would turn out, and they knew that retribution would be brutal if it didn't work out, that the white power establishment would react brutally towards the Black community. So they wanted to be able to say, that was that guy from Atlanta who came down here. We sent him back. Don't take it out on us. And it's powerful, I think, especially for young people, to hear the story of, don't wait until you feel like you're ready to be a leader. Otherwise, we're going to be waiting a long time for you to step up. You got to step up, act as if, in the Jewish culture, our line is where there is no leader, strive to be the leader.
Yeah.
And so that's really important. But also, what's important is we learn about Rosa Parks, we learn about John Lewis, we learn about Hosea Williams. They are at the tip. There are so many people beneath. Like, for example, the bus boycott in Montgomery. It's all Joanne Robinson, but we don't hear her story. Or the Selma to Montgomery March is really two women, Amelia Boynton Robinson and Marie Foster, who are already doing the work in Selma when Jimmy Lee Jackson is shot, and that's really the impetus for the march. In fact, they planned the march, but in 1965, two women can't be in the front. So students, John Lewis and Hosea Williams, take over. And one other quick thing is they are told by Dr. King not to do the march on what becomes Bloody Sunday. Well, what happens when you tell a 21-year-old college student not to do something? When the old man tells them not to do something, they're going to do it. I would remind you that the old man was all of 35 years old at the time, Dr. King. But once again, it's students stepping up. It's it's no coincidence that every social movement tries to change something with the young people first, because the
Yeah.
minute you have young people in first grade, second grade sitting with the other, who've been told that people are the other, it's over, because they realize it's just another young person sitting next to them who may not look like they do, but they're friends. As you said with the music in Memphis, all of a sudden you've got a connection, and the other becomes another, and all those barriers are broken down.
Yeah. Also, I think that oftentimes people think about the word leader and think about the helm or the forefront, right? But in
Mhm.
reality, if you really want your organization or your movement or your business or your group project, whatever it is, to be successful, everyone has to be a leader in whatever they're doing. Like
Right.
you have to carry yourself as a leader. And
Mhm.
that doesn't mean that when another leader says something, you start butting heads, right? Because the whole idea of this, I mean, to tie everything back together, civil discourse, it means I'm going to take action when I need to take action. I'm going to do the things that need to be done. I'm going to I'm going to treat people the way they need to be treated and be compassionate for people. And so I think like exactly like you're saying, I was going to bring up, um, wow, I don't know how I'm blanking on his name right now. I was going to bring up, what? Let's talk about, whoa, how am I blanking on his name? Remind me, remind me of who just passed away. I don't know how I'm blanking on his name.
Congressman John Lewis.
Yeah, wow, that was
Yeah.
pathetic. I was gonna bring up John Lewis, and I was gonna say, you know, like at the beginning, he was just a young person. It was Martin Luther King who was considered the leader.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly like you said. Like there was nothing special about John Lewis. He was just a youth who was frustrated, who wanted to see change, and
Mm-hmm.
was willing to do something about it. And
Right.
so, in that capacity, he was a leader. He was functioning as a leader. And then, I mean, eventually he did really become a leader, but that's just one example. All right, let's talk about mind trips real quick before we wrap up. So you have to also tell me, like, I don't really know much about mind trips.
Mind trips. So we had to, the term of the day, pivot quite hard when COVID hit. March 8th, we finished a civil rights trip. We had about another 25 trips planned between March 8th and June 1st. They all got canceled. Our summer trip ended up getting canceled. Now all our fall trips have been canceled as well due to COVID and people not wanting to travel. So, you know, business has to survive. You know, it's one thing to do the noble work. You also have to pay the bills and pay your staff. So we pivoted. We do have social distance trips that people could do if they feel comfortable traveling. I'm doing talks to various groups on Black Jewish relations, the myth and the reality, and a talk on how to have uncomfortable conversations, how to be comfortable having uncomfortable conversations. And then we're running a monthly online lecture series called Mind Trips. And it follows in the themes of Etgar, sort of telling a narrative of how you can engage your voice and make the other another human being, somebody that we are connected to. And so as there's a bumper sticker that's been on the bus every summer, if you can see yourself in the other, then whom can you harm? So if we stop otherizing them and make them another human being, how bad can you treat people? And so we started with a conversation with a man named Daryl Davis. He's a Black blues musician out of DC. And he, as he says, accidentally befriended Klansmen. How you do that, I have no idea. But he started having conversations with Klansmen to answer the question of how can you hate me if you don't know me? And because of just basic conversations, friendships are started. And all of a sudden, the Klansmen couldn't deal with the disconnect in their head that they had been brought up that the Black person is the other, not to be dealt with, and in fact, not to even really be living with or coexisting with. But they liked Daryl. And so all of a sudden, that disconnect was too big that they ended up leaving the Klan. Over 200 people left the Klan because of that conversation.
Whoa.
We just had a session the other night on systemic racism and learning, because people who look like me, who are out there doing some of the work of making this a more just world and equal world. You know, I grew up, there are barriers I don't even see because they are baked into the system of America they're not barriers for people who look like me, but for people who don't, they are there and alive and well in 2020. So it's important to understand, how have I benefited from a system that doesn't benefit all? Our next session is with the woman who was 11 years old when she got beaten on Bloody Sunday, Joanne Bland. We'll tell her story, but then we'll end with meeting with representatives from Fair Fight 2020 to talk about the fight for voting rights today. Clearly, in Georgia and in America, voting is still a right that is not given to everybody, or given easily to everybody. Then we'll meet with, in October, a lawyer named Evan Wolfson, who really led the campaign for marriage equality, the fight for marriage equality. As a college student, he wrote a thesis in the 80s about the fact that we need to change the hearts and minds of America surrounding the idea of marriage equality before it can legally change. Civil rights workers from the 60s will tell you that's one of the mistakes they made, was they attacked the legal system. And sure, they got the right to sit at the lunch counter, but the person next to them still didn't want them at the lunch counter. And so it's really no
Mm.
shock that marriage equality passes the Supreme Court in 2015, when your generation is really coming up and the numbers start to change, and all of a sudden 60% of America at that point had no problem with marriage equality. And why it didn't happen 10 years earlier when those numbers were way lower. And then in November, we'll have a post-election wrap up with Ruth Messenger from the left. We're still working out our person on the right. We had Senator Jeff Flake representing the right, but he had to back out. He's not going to be available, so we're filling that spot. And then in December, we're going to talk about, when all this is said and done, usually the holiday season is rough for people mentally anyway, mental health issues. But with COVID and the election, I think this one's going to be very rough. We're going to be meeting with Lady Gaga's Born This Way Foundation and the work they're doing on mental health, and how you can look out for mental health issues on your own, but also amongst your friends, and what to do. So that, people can subscribe to these talks on our website, Etgar, etgar.org.
We'll put it below.
Perfect. Etgar.org. And you can buy previous episodes because 2 have already happened. But it's been fascinating, and just keeps the conversation going and empowers people to understand, as you said, it is going to be just you. If you just live the life of change that you want to see, change is going to happen. You don't have to have the resume building title to create the change. Just be an active, engaged human being, citizen, and we'll create the change.
Typically I have like a standard protocol of asking a question towards the end of kind of to wrap up the interview, of like, what should the takeaway be, or like, how can people get involved? But I think that was a great way to end. I think you just kind of wrapped it up perfectly. So I think that's it for this episode 15, I believe, right? Is that what I said at the beginning? Episode 15? Kind of lose track. Yes, episode 15. Billy, thank you so much. It was an honor.
It was great.
I feel like I'm paying it forward by talking to you on this.
I think you are. It's a thrill to watch you do this work too. It makes it all worthwhile.
Thank you.
Not so much having Eli around, but you, it was around.
Yeah. All right, guys. That's episode 15.